Well, I thank the two previous speakers for their excellent introduction to the complexity of money. I wanted to just put the historical gloss on some of this. If you were to look at the Roman law of the contract of sale, you will see that the law requires one part of the transaction to be in money. It stipulates good for money. That's what, and it's the most ubiquitous form, if you like, of legal exchange globally, but it stipulates that a part of that transaction has to be in the form of money. Now, the second thing I'd like to just mention is that the question of money and banking is itself not well understood history, but the history seems to show that when the Templars set up their activities between the West and the Holy Land, one of the reasons for that was they could, at the beginning point of a pilgrim journey, he would post security, and he would get a note of the security that as he went through to the Holy Land, he would stop off and get whatever he needed in money or whatever on the way there, and it gave him the security not only to carry huge amounts of value, which he could be subject to robbery or theft or whatever. And when the Philip the Fair, although I think the Templars regard him as Philip the Ugly, arranged for their extermination in France, and I think it was the 13th of October. Yes. Friday the 13th, that's right. Some of the Templars did escape, and they went over into the Alps into Switzerland, where they helped the Swiss farmers repel an invasion from Austria. And they then settled there, and we know that Swiss banking goes back a long way. Many people believe that the Templars essentially founded this sort of banking empire that we characterize with the Swiss. So this exchange, going across state lines, security, a whole range of things implicate money, and the Templars are one illustration of that. Now, in the context of the feudal system, there was a class of outsiders that were never really included in the feudal system. So they functioned on the margins of society, picking up the dribs and drabs, which frequently involved money. And this class of people were the class who could read, write, and count. When feudalism was on the wane and mercantilism took over, these same people who were discredited were essentially the engine of mercantilism because they could read, write, and count, and they had access to liquidity. They financed mercantilism of that time, and they became the bankers, and many of those great families still exist today in the banking industry. I think it was Henry Maine who said, the movement of a progressive society is from status to contract. And contract, of course, is one of the central mechanisms by which we exchange and use money as a medium of exchange. Now, when we come to the modern age, the great debate about the role of money is collapsed into the value of property. The question is, what value do we put on property, and why do we collapse money into property? Now, what we have is, at least in the United States, you have the Constitution which talks about the protection of property. It doesn't exactly say what the degree of protection should be by law, but the gloss put onto it by the commercial class was that property is a peremptory value and it's protected by the law of God, naturally. That means it's very difficult to actually appropriate the property of others, even by the state, because the courts will block any attempt to expropriate property. This is an interesting battle that took place first in the United States, up and down, but it also became a major question of how the global economy is regulated. And the great debates about the new economy in the 1960s and so forth reflected the question of the degree to which foreign investment would be protected by some peremptory standard or by the convenience of state interest. Now, when we come to our own modern age, the theory that had most influence on the monetization of our economy is the theory of neoliberalism, and its roots were in Montpellier in Switzerland. And there, people like Milton Friedman and Popper essentially argued that the rise of socialism, particularly in Russia, meant the expropriation of property, and the expropriation of property meant the extinction of freedom. They extended that to include the American New Deal, which they saw as a form of creeping socialism and a creeping attack upon freedom. Additionally, Friedman supplanted, added some thoughts to these ideas with the notion that the Great Depression of the 1930s would never have happened if there had been sufficient liquidity put into the economies by the government. In other words, blaming capitalism and its speculative activities for the Great Depression was wrong. It was the government that had insufficiently monetized the economy. So that's a theme that has continued to our time. Now, when we look at property today, probably the most important thing that we note is that, money, is that during the Clinton administration, Clinton was persuaded to essentially deregulate financial institutions so that you had no control over the accumulation of money, the distribution of money, and accountability. Now, this led to some very interesting developments, because what happened now is, since the financial banking industry was free from state control or functioning free, they could now basically do something quite unusual. They could essentially create their own forms of property and monetize. So exotic new instruments were devised, which could be put on the market and sold. Often those who bought these as investments had no idea what they were investing in. And even an ordinary mortgage contract, you think you have a mortgage with a bank, but in fact, the moment you enter into that mortgage, it's sold to an investment bank, and it's collapsed into a huge pile of mortgages, and it's the pile of mortgages that are actually marketable. So you don't know what you're investing in, you don't know what the value of it is, and very few people do know. Now, this the mortgage industry in particular was so abused because all they needed was a contract. They didn't really care about the security behind the mortgage, and so there was almost a profligacy in giving anyone a mortgage, didn't matter what security you represented. That system collapsed, and which led to the Great Recession of 10 years ago. And but in addition to that, what we began to see with these exotic new instruments that could be converted into money via the market without regulation is that you had an enormous amount of capital now gravitating to the financial sector of the economy, not the manufacturing, but the financial sector. And the dysfunction here was that the financial sector could make more money out of speculating in even newer and more exotic financial instruments than actually investing in the real economy, in manufacturing and infrastructure and so on. And the consequence was that you have a kind of odd level of development where the financial sector shoots up, but the other is starving or having a rough time keeping its employees working. And so that has remained in some degree a factor today as the financial industry resists any effort to find a regulatory system for it that's accountable, to adequately finance the bureaucracies that are supposed to produce it but often don't. And so we have a quite crisis because we have a kind of a misalignment between the real economy and the financial sector. Now, the problem I have with the idea of just creating all of these exotic and often difficult to understand instruments that are marketed is that the history of the law of property is that it's one of the most resistant to change, and property doesn't like exotica. So this is completely unprecedented in the 2,000 years of our legal history. And most of the people who teach property in my university, when I take some of these instruments, what does this mean? I have no idea what it means. And when you look at these big financial houses that invest huge pension funds and so on, most recently they were persuaded to buy a huge number of these strangely exotic instruments and lost millions and millions in the stock market. And when people asked the investors, did you know anything? They didn't know anything. They were given exotic logarithms and told that this shows the value and it's safe. But in fact, it was a lie. So we don't even know how to police what appears at least to be inherent fraud in the system. Now, of course, what this means is that you've got a huge amount of capital. Where does it go? Well, you want to keep the system that's given it to you, and one way to do that is to control the legislature, at least in the United States. So what you then have is an army of lobbyists. And one famous Republican said, I don't want to be in politics anymore because Washington is being bought and sold like a sack of potatoes. So we have this complete imbalance and lack of accountability and a diminished level of transparency. And now when we go to the question of how this plays out politically, well, we have these vast actors, billionaire and multi-billionaire actors, who put money into those institutions that specifically are targeted to secure their interests as distinct from the public interest, like the Koch brothers and others. So, Edelman, who has made billions in China and has purchased a free newspaper to support Netanyahu in Jerusalem. So there are all kinds of implications, political and consumer-wise and so on. One thing was clear that when Elizabeth Warren proposed a special federal official to police these things, it was fought with a tenacity that was almost unbelievable. And in any event, the one thing that the right-wing billionaire class was clear is that she would not serve as the special prosecutor for this Office of Consumer Protection and Financial Matters created by the federal government. So we are stuck with a huge number of problems with global implications, and I leave it to my friend Gary.